Napoleon Bonaparte was not born in the heart of France. He came into the world on the island of Corsica. His birth date was August 15th, 1769. The town he was born in was called Ajaccio. This island had only recently become a part of France. The year before his birth, France had taken control of Corsica from the city-state of Genoa. This fact is very important to understanding his early life. He grew up feeling like an outsider. His family was part of the minor Italian nobility of Corsica. They were not extremely wealthy, but they had enough status to provide for their children's education and future prospects. His father, Carlo Bonaparte, was a lawyer and politician who initially fought for Corsican independence but later chose to cooperate with the French authorities to secure a better future for his family. His mother, Letizia Ramolino, was a strong and disciplined woman. She had a profound influence on Napoleon and his siblings. She taught them the values of hard work, family loyalty, and resilience. Napoleon was the second of 8 children who survived into adulthood. He was a curious and intelligent boy, often found with the book in his hands. He loved reading history and mathematics. These subjects would serve him well in his future military career. He was often described as being reserved and serious, a young boy who preferred his own company and thoughts to playing with others. This thoughtful nature hid a burning ambition that would one day propel him onto the world stage, far from his humble island beginnings. At the young age of 9, Napoleon left Corsica for mainland France. His father had secured him a scholarship to a military school. This was a significant step for the young boy. He had to learn to speak French properly, as his first language was Corsican, a dialect of Italian. He first attended a religious school in autumn to learn French. Then he moved to the military academy at Brienne-le-Château. He spent 5 years there. He felt isolated and was often teased by his wealthier French classmates for his accent and his less noble background. This experience only strengthened his resolve to prove himself and to excel in his studies. His time at Brienne was formative. He dedicated himself entirely to his work. He was particularly brilliant in mathematics, a skill essential for an artillery officer. He also read extensively, studying the great military leaders of the past like Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar. He dreamed of emulating their glorious achievements. In 1784, he was admitted to the prestigious École Militaire in Paris, the top military academy in France. He completed the 2-year course in just 1 year, graduating as a second lieutenant in the artillery. At just 16 years old, his military career had officially begun, but no one could have predicted the extraordinary path that lay ahead of him. The French Revolution began in 1789. This event changed France forever. It overthrew the king and the old system of aristocracy. For a young and ambitious military officer like Napoleon, this was a time of great opportunity. The old rules of promotion, which favored those with noble blood, were swept away. Now, a man could rise based on his talent and his achievements on the battlefield. Napoleon, with his Corsican background and minor noble status, would have had limited prospects under the old regime. The revolution opened doors that would have otherwise remained firmly shut. He initially returned to Corsica, getting involved in the complex local politics, but his destiny lay in France. Napoleon's first chance to make a name for himself came in 1793. He was an artillery captain during the siege of Toulon. The city of Toulon had rebelled against the revolutionary government and was being supported by British and Spanish forces. The siege was going badly for the French Revolutionary Army. Napoleon, though only 24 years old, devised a brilliant plan. He realized that by capturing the high ground overlooking the harbor, they could use their cannons to drive the enemy ships away. This would force the city to surrender. He was given command of the artillery to carry out his strategy. His plan was a spectacular success. Under his direct and courageous leadership, the French forces captured the key positions. Napoleon himself was wounded in the thigh by a bayonet during the assault, a mark of his willingness to lead from the front. Just as he had predicted, the British and Spanish fleets were forced to abandon the harbor, and the city of Toulon fell back into the hands of the Republic. For his crucial role in this victory, Napoleon was promoted to the rank of Brigadier General. He was no longer an unknown officer. His name was now known to the powerful leaders of the revolution in Paris. He had demonstrated his military genius and his decisiveness under fire. Following his triumph at Toulon, Napoleon's career continued to be tied to the turbulent politics of the revolution. He faced setbacks, including a brief period of house arrest due to his association with Augustin Robespierre, the brother of the more famous Maximilien Robespierre, after their fall from power. However, his skills were too valuable to be ignored for long. in October 1795, he was called upon to defend the National Convention in Paris from a royalist mob. In what became known as the 13 Vendémiaire, Napoleon, without hesitation, ordered his cannons to fire a whiff of grape shot into the crowds, dispersing the threat and saving the government. This decisive and ruthless action made him a hero of the Republic and earned him a promotion to Commander of the Army of the Interior. After his successes in France, Napoleon was given command of the French army in Italy in 1796. The Directory, the government in charge of France at the time, saw this as a way to keep the popular and ambitious general busy and far from Paris. The army he was given was poorly equipped and demoralized. However, Napoleon's leadership transformed them into a formidable fighting force. He led a brilliant campaign, winning a series of stunning victories against the Austrians and their allies. He secured vast territories for France and sent back immense amounts of treasure and art to Paris. These victories made him even more famous and beloved by the French people. Following his Italian campaign, Napoleon proposed an invasion of Egypt. His goal was to disrupt Britain's trade routes to India and establish a French presence in the Middle East. The Directory, still wary of his popularity, agreed to the plan. While his military campaign in Egypt had mixed results, including a major naval defeat at the Battle of the Nile, Napoleon brought with him a team of scientists and scholars. This scientific expedition led to many important discoveries, including the Rosetta Stone, which would later allow for the deciphering of ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. He skillfully managed the news coming back to France, emphasizing his victories and downplaying his setbacks. By 1799, the government in France was in crisis. The Directory was weak, corrupt, and unpopular. The economy was in shambles, and the country was threatened by a new coalition of European powers. Many people in France longed for a strong leader who could restore order and stability. Seeing his opportunity, Napoleon secretly abandoned his army in Egypt and made a perilous journey back to France. He was welcomed as a national hero, the one man who seemed capable of saving the nation from collapse. He immediately began plotting with several prominent politicians, including Emmanuel Joseph CS, to overthrow the failing government. The plan was put into action on November 9, 1799. This date was the 18th of Brumaire in the French Republican calendar. The coup d'etat was a complex affair, filled with political maneuvering and a show of military force. Napoleon addressed the two legislative councils, but his speech was poorly received and he was met with angry resistance. For a moment, it seemed the coup might fail. However, his brother, Lucien Bonaparte, who was the president of the lower council, saved the day by calling in the troops to disperse the dissenting deputies. The Directory was dissolved, and a new government, the Consulate, was established in its place. Napoleon, at the age of just 30, was appointed as the first consul, making him the most powerful man in France. As first consul, Napoleon held immense power, but he was not yet the absolute ruler of France. The new constitution gave him the most authority, but there were two other consuls who served with him. However, Napoleon quickly began to consolidate his control. He was a master of politics and propaganda. He presented himself as the man who had ended the chaos of the revolution while preserving its most important gains, such as equality before the law and the abolition of feudal privileges. He worked tirelessly, centralizing the government, reforming the financial system by creating the Bank of France, and seeking to end the internal conflicts that had plagued the country for a decade. Napoleon's popularity soared as he brought peace and stability to France. He defeated the Austrians once again at the Battle of Marengo in 1800, which further secured his position. In 1802, he signed the Treaty of Amiens with Britain, bringing a temporary end to the wars that had engulfed Europe for years. The grateful French people overwhelmingly voted in a plebiscite, a direct vote, to make him first consul for life. This was a major step towards absolute rule. He now had the power to name his successor, creating a system that looked very much like a monarchy. He was ruler in all but name, and the trappings of a royal court began to reappear in Paris. The transition from consul for life to emperor was driven by both ambition and a desire for security. In 1804, a royalist plot to assassinate Napoleon was uncovered. This event, known as the affair of the Duc d'Enghien, was used by Napoleon and his supporters to argue that the best way to secure the future of his government was to make his rule hereditary. The idea was that if his position was inherited, there would be no point in assassinating him, as a successor would already be in place. The Senate was persuaded to propose that Napoleon be made the hereditary emperor of the French. Another plebiscite was held, and the French people, once again, voted overwhelmingly in favor of the change. On December 2nd, 1804, a magnificent coronation ceremony was held at the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris. The event was carefully orchestrated by Napoleon himself to be a spectacle of unparalleled grandeur. Pope Pius VII was invited to Paris to officiate, lending religious legitimacy to the new regime. However, in a famous and symbolic gesture, Napoleon took the crown from the Pope's hands and placed it on his own head. He then crowned his wife Josephine as Empress. This act demonstrated that he owed his power not to God or to the Church, but to his own achievements and the will of the French people. The young officer from Corsica was now Napoleon I, Emperor of the French. One of my most significant and lasting achievements was not, on the battlefield, but actually in the realm of law. Before the revolution, France did not have a single unified set of laws. Instead, the country was really just a patchwork of different legal systems. The laws in the south were based on old Roman traditions, while the north followed a system of customary feudal laws. This was confusing and honestly, pretty unfair. The revolution had promised legal equality, but it had failed to create a comprehensive legal framework. I recognized the urgent need for a single, clear set of civil laws that would apply to everyone in France, regardless of their region or social status. So, as first consul, I established a commission of expert jurists to create this new civil code. Even though I was not a lawyer, my sharp mind and practical nature were, I think, invaluable to the project. I took a deep personal interest, presiding over more than half of the sessions of the Council of State that debated the new code. I insisted that the laws should be written in clear, simple language that any ordinary citizen could understand. My goal was to do away with the complex and obscure legal jargon that had, for too long, benefited only lawyers and judges. I wanted to create a system based on reason and common sense, reflecting the core principles of the revolution. The Civil Code was officially enacted on March 21, 1804. It would later be renamed the Napoleonic Code. It was a revolutionary document that fundamentally reshaped French society. The code enshrined the principle of equality before the law for all male citizens. It protected the right to own private property, which was a key concern for the bourgeoisie who had supported the revolution. It also abolished feudalism and the privileges of birthright once and for all. The code created a unified legal framework for contracts, inheritance, and family law. It standardized the civil system across the entire country, making justice more predictable and accessible than ever before. However, the Napoleonic Code also had its limitations. While it was progressive in many ways, it was regressive in others, particularly concerning women and families. The code placed the wife under the firm control of her husband. Women were denied individual rights, they could not sell property or enter into contracts without their husband's permission. Divorce was made more difficult, and the father was given almost absolute authority over his children. In this sense, the code reflected my own conservative views on the family as the cornerstone of a stable society. Despite these flaws, the Napoleonic Code was, without a doubt, a monumental achievement, providing a logical and uniform basis for civil law that has influenced legal systems across the world. Napoleon understood that a strong nation needed more than just a powerful army and a clear set of laws. It also needed an educated populace and a modern infrastructure. He believed that education was essential for producing capable civil servants, military officers, and loyal citizens who would serve the state. The revolutionary governments had disrupted the old education system, which was largely controlled by the church but had not effectively replaced it. So, Napoleon set out to create a centralized, secular, and state-run education system that would standardize learning across France and promote the values of his regime. His most significant reform in education was the creation of the lycée system in 1802. The lycées were secondary schools for boys, designed to provide a rigorous and standardized education with a strong emphasis on science, mathematics, and military discipline. The curriculum was the same in every lycée across the country. The teachers were appointed by the state, and the students often wore uniforms and followed a kind of quasi-military routine. The goal was to train the next generation of France's elite. While primary education for the general population was less of a priority and remained largely in the hands of local communities and the church, the lycées were a major step towards creating a meritocratic system where talented boys from middle-class backgrounds could gain access to higher education and careers in public service. In addition to education, Napoleon embarked on an ambitious program of public works that transformed the landscape of Paris and other French cities. He wanted to make Paris the most beautiful capital in the world, a city that would reflect the glory of his empire. He commissioned the construction of new bridges, such as the Pont des Arts and the Pont d'Iéna. He built wide new boulevards, improved the city's sewer systems, and created new public fountains to provide clean water. He also ordered the construction of famous monuments that still define the Parisian skyline today, including the magnificent Arc de Triomphe, which was built to celebrate the victories of his army, and the Arc de Triomphe du Carrousel. These projects were not just for show, they served practical purposes as well. The new roads and canals that were built across France improved transportation and facilitated trade, which helped to boost the economy. Public works also provided employment for many people, helping to reduce social unrest. These grand construction projects were a form of propaganda, demonstrating the power, stability, and prosperity of Napoleon's rule. They were tangible symbols of a new modern France rising from the ashes of the revolution. Every new bridge, monument, and school was a testament to the emperor's vision of a well-ordered and glorious nation under his command. By 1805, Napoleon's empire was at the height of its power, but it was once again facing a major threat. Britain, alarmed by Napoleon's growing dominance, had organized a third coalition with Austria and Russia. Napoleon had assembled his army, the Grande Armée, on the coast of the English Channel, preparing for an invasion of Britain. However, the defeat of the French and Spanish fleets by the British Navy under Admiral Nelson at the Battle of Trafalgar in October 1805 made an invasion impossible. With his plans for Britain thwarted, Napoleon swiftly turned his attention eastward to confront the Austrian and Russian armies that were advancing through Central Europe. What followed was one of the most brilliant military campaigns in history. In a series of rapid marches, Napoleon moved the Grande Armée with incredible speed across Europe, surprising and surrounding a large Austrian army at Ulm in Germany and forcing it to surrender with barely a fight. He then marched on to capture the Austrian capital, Vienna. Despite these successes, he still faced the main combined Russo-Austrian army, which was led by Tsar Alexander I of Russia and Holy Roman Emperor Francis II. The decisive confrontation came on December 2, 1805, near the town of Austerlitz, in what is now the Czech Republic. It was the first anniversary of his coronation. The Battle of Austerlitz is widely considered to be Napoleon's masterpiece. He was outnumbered, but he used deception and superior strategy to achieve a stunning victory. He deliberately weakened his right flank to lure the Allies into attacking him there. As the Allied forces moved down from the strategically important Pratzen Heights to attack his right, Napoleon launched his main assault on the now weakened Allied center, capturing the heights. This split the Allied army in two. He then turned to crush both flanks of the enemy. The result was a total and devastating defeat for the Third Coalition. The battle effectively destroyed the coalition and forced Austria to sign a humiliating peace treaty. The victory at Austerlitz confirmed Napoleon's military genius and solidified his control over much of continental Europe. He was the undisputed master of the continent. He dissolved the ancient Holy Roman Empire and created the Confederation of the Rhine, a group of German states under his protection. He placed his brothers and relatives on the thrones of other European countries, creating a vast grand empire that was dominated by France. For the next few years, Napoleon's power seemed absolute. He would go on to defeat the Prussians at the Battle of Jena-Auerstedt in 1806 and the Russians at Friedland in 1807, expanding his empire to its greatest extent. This period marked the apex of his power and influence. Despite his dominance, Napoleon's empire had a critical weakness. He could not defeat Great Britain. Protected by its powerful navy, Britain continued to resist French control and finance coalitions against him. To weaken Britain economically, Napoleon established the Continental System in 1806. This was a large-scale embargo, which forbade his allies and all countries under French control from trading with Britain. However, the policy was difficult to enforce and caused widespread economic hardship across Europe. It was deeply unpopular and led to smuggling and resentment. The most significant challenge to the system came from Russia. Tsar Alexander I, under pressure from his nobles, reopened trade with Britain in 1810, a direct defiance of Napoleon's orders. This defiance could not be tolerated. Napoleon felt he had to make an example of Russia to keep his empire in line. In 1812, he assembled the largest European army ever seen, the Grande Armée, consisting of over 600,000 soldiers from France and its allied states. He launched a massive invasion of Russia, expecting a quick and decisive victory. However, the Russians refused to engage him in a major battle. Instead, they adopted a scorched earth policy, retreating deeper and deeper into the vast Russian territory and destroying all crops and supplies as they went. The immense size of Napoleon's army became a liability, as it was impossible to feed and supply so many men. Napoleon finally managed to fight a major battle at Borodino, just outside Moscow. It was a terribly bloody engagement, with massive casualties on both sides. The French army won a narrow tactical victory, and a week later, they entered a deserted Moscow. Napoleon expected the Tsar to sue for peace, but no offer came. Instead, fires, likely set by Russian patriots, broke out across Moscow, destroying much of the city and any supplies the French army might have used. With no prospect of a surrender and facing the onset of the brutal Russian winter, Napoleon had no choice but to order a retreat. The long march back to France was one of the greatest disasters in military history. The retreat from Moscow destroyed the Grande Armée. Tens of thousands of soldiers died from starvation, freezing temperatures, and constant attacks by Russian partisans. Of the more than 600,000 men who had invaded Russia, fewer than 100,000 made it back. This catastrophic defeat shattered the myth of Napoleon's invincibility. Seeing his weakness, his enemies formed a new sixth coalition, including Russia, Prussia, Austria, Sweden, and Great Britain. In October 1813, they confronted Napoleon at the Battle of Leipzig, also known as the Battle of the Nations. It was a massive three-day battle where Napoleon was decisively defeated. This loss forced his armies to retreat back across the Rhine and into France, signaling the beginning of the end for his empire. After the disastrous defeat at Leipzig, the Allied armies pushed into France. Napoleon, with a depleted and inexperienced army, fought a brilliant but ultimately hopeless defensive campaign in the early months of 1814. Despite winning several small battles, he could not stop the inevitable. The Allied forces were too numerous and too determined. In March 1814, Paris surrendered to the coalition. Faced with pressure from his own marshals, who refused to continue fighting, Napoleon was forced to abdicate his throne. On April 6, 1814, he gave up his power as Emperor of the French. The victorious Allies restored the Bourbon monarchy to France, placing King Louis XVIII, the brother of the executed Louis XVI, on the throne. The Allies decided to exile Napoleon to the small island of Elba, located in the Mediterranean Sea off the coast of Italy. They allowed him to keep the title of Emperor and gave him sovereignty over the tiny island. It was a comfortable exile, but for a man like Napoleon, it was a cage. He watched from afar as the new king in France quickly became unpopular and as the victorious powers argued among themselves at the Congress of Vienna. Believing the French people would welcome him back, Napoleon planned a daring escape. In February 1815, he slipped away from Elba with a small group of followers and landed in the south of France. This began the period known as the 100 Days. His return to France was triumphant. The soldiers sent to arrest him instead flocked to his banner, and his journey to Paris turned into a victory parade. King Louis XVIII fled, and Napoleon once again took control of the government without firing a single shot. However, the European powers were not going to let him rule again. They immediately declared him an outlaw and mobilized their armies to crush him once and for all. The final decisive confrontation came on June 18, 1815, at the Battle of Waterloo in modern-day Belgium. In a close and hard-fought battle, Napoleon's army was defeated by a combined British and Prussian force led by the Duke of Wellington and Gebhard von Blücher. This time, the Allies took no chances. After his second abdication, Napoleon was exiled to the remote and bleak island of St. Helena, a tiny British possession in the middle of the South Atlantic Ocean. There, under constant guard, he spent the last 6 years of his life dictating his memoirs and creating the powerful legend of his life that would endure long after his death. He died on May 5, 1821. His impact on France and the world was immense. He had brought an end to the revolution, created a modern legal and administrative state, and his wars had redrawn the map of Europe and spread the ideas of the French Revolution, such as nationalism and legal equality. He remains one of history's most fascinating and controversial figures, remembered as both a tyrant and a brilliant modernizer.